So how do we filter and how do we get stuff back in? We've talked about how we filter, but you know that 99% of the stuff that we filter just goes back into our bloodstream. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. How do we reabsorb it back into the body? If you remember, we had, so this is a nephron that we just stretched out, just so you kind of get a feel of what it looks like. But you know that we have our afferent tubule, goes into our glomerulus, and then we have our efferent tubule. We know that there's hormones that can secrete speed right here to make things go faster. If things go faster through here, we're going to have less things to filter because they won't have time to sort of go through this process. They'll actually just keep speeding up and going this way. But if we slow down filtration rate, GFR rate, we're going to be able to go ahead and suck out those salts, suck out those waters, and clean things up, and then put them back into our bloodstream if need be. Really, the star here is going to be these tubules, the nephron, but we're going to start out by looking at our proximal conventional convoluted tubule. So our PCT is going to do about 65% of that reabsorption. And it's going to do it because it's very long. It has a lot of mitochondria in it. And if we look at, we're going to look at a cross-section of it in a second, you're going to see that there's tons of those microvilli in there. And because of that, that's going to increase our surface area and increase our reabsorption rate. And just so you can remember that the PCT looked like, you could see that after the glomerulus and our capsule, we have this convoluted tubule. So the reason why it's called convoluted is because of all these folds. And what you're seeing here is arteries and veins that are here. And 65% of that filtrate is going to just dump right back into the bloodstream. And as soon as we get it back into the bloodstream, we're going to go ahead and just recirculate it through the heart, and then get it going. And eventually it'll go to, I guess the real stream of it would be to go from the renal veins back to the vena cava, up to the heart, and it sort of circulates back around that way. It's cleaned filtrate. We're going to reabsorb at the PCT, so let's kind of look at how this happens. If you look, we have our PCT. This would be the inside of the PCT. This would be the one cell thick proximal distal tubule of the nephron. You could see that we have our microvilli. You could see that we have our capsules. And you'll notice two things are going on. Number one is we have a way to capture this, we'll call it filtrate at this time, because we're in the process of filtering it, and eventually we're going to make most of that go into the bloodstream. We have two mechanisms to move it from one area to another. So number one is we're going to have sodiums, glucose, amino acids, and things like that. They're going to come through just a port, just moving through this direction. We're going to have sodium and potassium come into those cells of the PCT using a antiport system, which is just meaning that one thing has to come in and something has to come out. So there's going to be a little bit of a movement this direction. And then we're going to have water. Water is just going to come in through simple diffusion. But now let's look at the other side of the cell of the PCT. So this is going to be the other side, this is going to be the capillaries. So we're going to dump from filtrate to capillaries. Glucose, amino acids, things like that, that's going to move through facilitated diffusion. And we're going to do that with a cell. We're going to go ahead and have a bunch of proteins here that are each going to do these guys. And let's kind of jump to this slide. It'll help us sort of think about it. Glucose and amino acids are going to be reabsorbed by active transport, some sort of pumping mechanism. That's going to be one of the reasons why we have so many amino acids there. We have water that's reabsorbed through osmosis, which is going to be a facultative transport system, so going from high to low. Water, we can go ahead and potentially use a protein, and that protein is going to be called an aquaporin, and that's going to just facilitate the movement of water from one side to another a lot faster. We'll have some things that are negatively charged, and if you remember, negatively charged ions don't move across a membrane really easily. So what they're going to have to do is we're going to have a positive and negative charge sort of change them up. And by doing that, we're going to have one thing go in and one thing go out. And things like chloride, potassium, phosphates, bicarbonates, these are all going to follow that positive sodium ion to sort of go the opposite direction. So these are going to be things that kind of go in the opposite direction of the other charge. And then some things are going to be moved through exocytosis. So large proteins that did make it through, maybe some hormones that we captured, we're going to do this endocytosis system where we're going to gather them up in a vacuole and then move them across that PCT cell and then dump them into the bloodstream. The PCT is going to be surrounded by a lot of these arteries and veins, and they're going to dump to those arteries and veins, eventually go out the renal tubules, and then back up to the heart. We're going to have some things like albumins and other proteins in the capillaries, and albumin is designed to create a high osmolarity or high pressure. It's a protein that we have in our blood, and they're designed to be there just to give it space. If we didn't have albumin, we'd have to have a lot more water, and we might have a lot more fluctuation in our blood pressure. But by having this large protein that can't really be moved into cells and sort of just sits there, it gives our blood a little more viscosity, a little thickness. It also helps create this osmolarity, so it makes it so blood is always trying to get water into it, and it helps with that process. Our star is going to be the loop of Henle. So if you remember the proximal tubule, and then we had that loop, and then eventually we went to the distal tubule. The functions of the loop of Henle is going to be for water conservation. And what's going to happen is things that move out of the loop of Henle is going to be things that we might consider waste, like bile salts, uric acids, urea, ammonia, hence the smell, and some drugs. So you can do drug screening this way. It also does a little bit of acid and base balance by secreting hydrogen ions and bicarbonates into the blood, and sort of helps regulate blood pH. What's really happening here is, I'll bring this up in a better picture coming up soon, but we'll blow up the loop of Henle and talk about this thing called counter-current exchange. Finally, we'll have the distal tubule, and that's going to collect, basically it's going to be controlled by two hormones, renin and aldosterone. And basically renin is produced when you have low blood pressure. Renin is released, and it makes it so that angiotensin 2 is created, and we're going to make it so less filtrate is going to go out of the body. Aldosterone is going to promote salt and water reabsorption. So anytime your body is low in salt and water, we're going to go ahead and have this hormone come in. It's going to decrease urine volume and increase blood pressure. So these two usually work closely together. They're produced at the same time. They're two hormones that work at the DCT, or distal tubule. The DCT's hormones continued. We have antidiuretic hormone, which you probably heard of before. It's dehydration releases ADH, which is stimulating water reabsorption. So you're low in water, you're going to make ADH, it's going to make you retain water. ANP, which is anti-natriuretic peptides, is going to promote water and salt excretion, and it's going to respond to blood pressure being too high, which makes sense. Your blood pressure is too high, which means that there's too much salt and water in it. We're going to have ANP come in, and that is going to make you pee out water and salt, and that's going to make you go back to a normal blood pressure. So this results in a decreased blood pressure, increased urine volume, right, waste, and decreased blood volume, which is the reason why you had ANP start. And then we have PTH, which is parathyroid hormone. That's going to increase blood calcium into the increased blood calcium by increasing calcium absorption into the kidney. And that's going to cause the release of calcium from your bones and stimulate production of vitamin D in the kidneys. What this is really doing is monitoring calcium levels and dictating if we should get more calcium out of our bones or put some back in. Here's a table of hormones, and then we'll continue by talking about in our next video, the countercurrent mechanisms of the nephron.